The midday sun beat down on Jared's brow as he toiled in his overgrown backyard, the rhythmic clang of his shovel against the stubborn earth a familiar companion. He was a creature of habit, a man content with the quiet hum of his life in the sleepy town of Oakwood. But on that sweltering Tuesday, a different sound echoed through the suburban air, a dull, resonant thunk that vibrated up the shaft of his shovel and into his very bones. He knelt, brushing away the dirt, and there it was, a nugget, no bigger than his thumb, yet radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. It glinted, a beacon of impossible, unadulterated gold. Jared Gray, a man of simple means, felt his heart pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He tucked it into his pocket, a secret shimmering against his thigh. But secrets, especially golden ones, rarely stay buried. A passing neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, with her hawk-like gaze and a penchant for gossip, noticed the unusual spark in John's eyes, the way his hand kept straying to his pocket. The news, like wildfire, leapt from fence to fence, from porch to porch, igniting a feverish gold rush in Oakwood. Suddenly, Jared's once tranquil haven became a battleground. Faces he barely recognized pressed against his fences, their eyes gleaming with an unholy hunger. Whispers turned to shouts, pleas to demands. Children, usually content with sidewalk chalk, now scaled his back wall, their small hands scrabbling for purchase. Adults, armed with spades and an insatiable greed, tried to coax, then threaten their way onto his property. His lawn, once a sanctuary for robins, was now trampled by frantic feet, a chaotic mosaic of divots and desperate scrabbling. Sleep became a luxury, peace a forgotten dream. The incessant clamor, the endless parade of avarice, gnawed at Jared's sanity. He saw not neighbors, but ghoulish figures, their faces contorted by a single, burning desire: his gold. The quiet man of Oakwood, pushed to the brink, felt a dark resolve harden within him. One moonless night, with the only light the glow of his determined fury, Jared began to work. He dug, he wired, he rigged. Tripwires snaked through the overgrown bushes, camouflage pits lay hidden beneath tempting patches of grass. And a series of alarming contraptions, born of a desperate mind, waited silently in the shadows. His backyard, the source of his unexpected fortune, was now a deadly labyrinth, a fortress against the encroaching greed. The gold, once a symbol of dreams, had become a curse, transforming not just Jared's life, but the very soul of Oakwood. And as dawn broke, casting long, menacing shadows across his booby-trapped property, Jared stood watch. A man, guarding a treasure he now wished he had never found. The sun, a mocking eye in the morning sky, cast long, distorted shadows across Jared's now perilous backyard. The air was thick with a palpable anticipation, a tension that hummed like a plucked wire. The neighbors, a silent, watchful throng, lurked behind their curtains, their faces pressed against glass, waiting for the inevitable. Old Man Hemlock, known more for his relentless curiosity than his good sense, was the first. His eyes, beady and avaricious, glittered with a singular obsession. He'd seen Jared's haphazard digging, heard the clanging, and concluded that a fortune lay just beneath the surface. He slipped from his porch, a rusty spade clutched in his trembling hand, and crept towards Jared's side fence, a section he knew was particularly rickety. He braced himself, pushed through a sagging board, and stumbled onto what he thought was solid ground. But the ground gave way with a sickening whoosh. A perfectly camouflaged pit, artfully dug and covered with flimsy branches and leaves, swallowed him whole. A yelp, muffled and comical, escaped his lips as he landed with a soft thud at the bottom, his rusty spade clattering beside him. Before the echoes of his fall could fade, a high-pitched shriek sliced through the morning calm. Young Timmy, a notoriously mischievous boy from down the street, had decided to try his luck too. He'd ignored his mother's frantic warnings and darted across Jared's front lawn, aiming for a shortcut to the promised land of gold. But as his foot landed on what appeared to be a harmless patch of overgrown weeds, a series of tin cans, strung together with fishing line, rattled violently. The sound was ear-splitting, chaotic symphony of cheap metal that echoed through the quiet street, accompanied by a sudden, jarring thwack as a perfectly aimed, mud-filled sock, tied to a spring-loaded contraption, smacked him square in the face. Timmy, startled and covered in grime, burst into tears, tripping over a strategically placed rake that sent him sprawling. A collective gasp rippled through the neighborhood. The gold fever, so rampant just moments before, began to falter, replaced by a chilling realization. This wasn't just a man protecting his property. This was a man defending his sanity, his peace, with an ingenuity born of desperation. Jared, perched silently on his porch swing, watched it all unfold. His face was grim, unyielding. The gold had brought him not riches, but an unexpected war, and he was determined to win. The immediate aftermath of Old Man Hemlock's tumble and Timmy's muddy mishap was a stunned silence. The curtain twitchers slowly receded from their windows. The whispers that had fueled the gold rush now morphed into murmurs of disbelief, then outright fear. Jared, once a figure of mild curiosity, had transformed into something else entirely. A man pushed to his breaking point, armed with an alarming creativity. Mrs. Henderson, usually the first to spread a juicy rumor, found herself unusually quiet. She'd seen the desperation in Jared's eyes for days, but never imagined it would manifest like this. Mr. Werthers, who'd been eyeing a particularly large oak on Jared's property as a potential gold cache, suddenly felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The glint of gold had faded from their eyes, replaced by a stark, sobering understanding. Jared Gray was serious, deadly serious. The neighborhood, once a hotbed of avarice, became a place of uneasy truce. Children were sternly warned to stay far from the Grays' property, their parents recounting the tales of Timmy's humiliation with grim satisfaction. Adults who had previously schemed and whispered now simply averted their gaze when passing Jared's house. The gold, they realized, wasn't worth a broken leg, a public embarrassment, or worse. The thrill of the chase had been replaced by the very real threat of Jared's ingenious and frankly terrifying defenses. Jared, meanwhile, found an eerie quiet settling over his home. The constant siege was over. He could work in his garden without watchful eyes, sleep without the fear of trespassers. The gold nugget, still in his pocket, felt less like a blessing and more like a heavy burden. It had brought him solitude, yes, but at what cost? He was no longer just Jared Gray, the quiet man of Oakwood. He was the golden curse of Oakwood, a title whispered with a mixture of awe and genuine fear. The peace was fragile, built on a foundation of tripwires and hidden pits. Jared knew the greed hadn't vanished, merely receded. It was a watchful beast, waiting for its next opportunity. The gold nugget remained, a silent, weighty presence in Jared's life. He hadn't bothered to take it to a jeweler, hadn't even truly considered selling it. What was the point? Its discovery had irrevocably altered the quiet fabric of his existence, and now, even with the cessation of direct assaults on his property, the psychological toll lingered. His days settled into a new, unsettling rhythm. He still tended his garden, but now his eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, a silent surveillance. The traps remained, a constant reminder of the darkness that greed had brought to Oakwood. He maintained them meticulously, not out of malice, but out of a grim necessity. He knew that given enough time, The allure of the gold might outweigh the fear of his defenses. The neighbors, for their part, continued to give Jared's property a wide berth. The initial fear had morphed into a sort of reluctant respect, mingled with a lingering curiosity. They'd occasionally see him in town, buying groceries, and the air around him would shift, becoming charged with an unspoken acknowledgement of his transformation. He was no longer just Jared, but the man who had faced down an entire neighborhood with nothing but his wits and a shovel. The solitude he had once cherished now felt heavy, tinged with isolation. The gold had driven away the invaders, but it had also, in a way, driven away true connection. He was a living legend, a local cautionary tale, but also a figure apart. The nugget, sometimes warm against his skin, sometimes cold as lead, was a constant paradox. It was the source of his newfound peace, yet also the barrier between him and the normal life he once knew. He often wondered what would happen if he simply gave the gold away or threw it into the deepest part of the lake. Would the peace truly return, or had the experience indelibly marked him and Oakwood forever? The golden curse, it seemed, was less about the treasure itself and more about the darkness it unearthed in the hearts of men, including his own. The seasons turned, and the legend of Jared Gray and the golden curse settled into the rhythm of Oakwood. The traps, once a desperate improvisation, had become an almost unconscious part of Jared's routine. He knew their every placement, every trigger, navigating his treacherous backyard with the ease of a seasoned tightrope walker. The gold nugget, still nestled in his pocket, felt less like a heavy burden and more like a permanent fixture, an extension of himself. One particularly blustery autumn afternoon, a sudden gust of wind tore through Oakwood, ripping branches from trees and sending debris skittering across lawns. A large, gnarled branch, thicker than Jared's arm, snapped from his ancient oak tree and crashed directly onto his back fence, splintering the old wood. Jared, ever vigilant, rushed out to assess the damage, his mind already calculating repairs. He moved with practiced ease, stepping around the tripwires he knew lay hidden, avoiding the depressions that marked his camouflaged pits. But the wind, it seemed, had a mischievous will of its own. As he bent to inspect a particularly nasty splinter, another unexpected gust howled through the yard, catching a loose tarp he'd forgotten to secure. The tarp, whipped by the wind, billowed out and snagged on a barely visible fishing line, pulling it taut. Jared heard the telltale snick just a split second before the heavy, mud-filled bucket he'd rigged to a pulley system swung down with terrifying speed. He instinctively ducked, but not far enough. The bucket, meant for a trespasser, connected with his temple with a sickening thud. He staggered back, disoriented, tripping over a vine that the wind had shifted and landed hard. His arm shot out to break his fall, only to land squarely on the pressure plate of a long-forgotten, smaller trap he'd set up near the back door. A spring-loaded net designed to ensnare smaller animals. The net sprung, wrapping around him in an instant, tangling his legs and pinning his arms. He thrashed, a grunting, frustrated sound escaping his lips, but the more he struggled, the tighter the netting became. The once feared guardian of the gold was now a trussed-up victim, a prisoner of his own intricate, desperate design. He lay there, tangled and stunned, the wind rustling the leaves above him, the setting sun casting long, mocking shadows. The golden nugget pressed against his chest, a cruel irony. He had created a fortress, a defense so effective that it had, in the end, turned on its master. The golden curse had come full circle, trapping not the greedy, but the very man who sought to escape its grasp. And for the first time in a very long time, As the cold evening air settled around him, Jared Gray let out a laugh, a single bitter and utterly helpless sound. He knew that nobody was coming to find him.